I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jacksonville Planning Advisory Board to order. It is now 6:02. And at this time, if you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the invocation. The pledge will be given by Matt Ray and the invocation by Steve Forney.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hold hands, please. God of power and might, wisdom and justice, through you authority is rightly administered, laws are enacted, and judgment is decreed. Assist us with your spirit, counsel, and fortitude. May we always seek the ways of righteousness, justice, and mercy. Grant that we may be enabled to protect the dignity of all human life. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
That's neat. That's easy. So Reverend Forney.
Okay. It's now time for the approval of the agenda.
I move.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Dr. Lassonde, second by Bob Dupuy. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. All those like, motion passes. Review and approval of the minutes. I believe we had one correction on the minutes where it says approval of the agenda. It says Doug Lassonde moved to approve the agenda as amended. Bob Dupuy seconded the motion. Strike out the word grace. Does anybody have any other corrections, changes?
Move to approve as amended.
We have a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Second from Steve, motion from Bob. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, motion passes. I'll get around to it. City Council update. Who's going to do that?
I'll do that, Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilman Sosa sent his regards and asked that I report for him tonight. So similar to what you all will see this evening, on March 5th, the staff from Jackson Police Department and us, Planning Department, presented information about hookah, tobacco, vape, and similar establishments, seeking council's input and direction on possible regulations for these types of establishments. And council directed staff to prepare a UDO text amendment to include spacing standards from certain zones, land uses, and other regulations. And as you've already seen in your agenda, that's agenda item number 1 tonight. So we're just bringing that forth for planning board recommendation at this point now that we have drafted those standards.
Okay. Thank you very much. There being no old business, we go right to new business. And I believe you're up, Ryan.
Good evening, board. So tonight, we've got a special guest with us tonight, Chief Mike Yanera. He's going to invite him up to the podium to share some information as it relates to this agenda item, but I'm going to start it with basically that the planning department is in conjunction with the Jackson Police Department have been reviewing existing ordinances throughout the state of North Carolina to regulate hookah, tobacco, vape, and similar retail establishments. As a result, staff believes that this is necessary to create standards that are similar to others within the state, and it would be applicable for the city of Jacksonville and the ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction. These regulations aim to balance the needs of local businesses while safeguarding the health, safety, and welfare of residents, particularly minors, and ensuring the orderly development of the city. So I'm going to ask Chief Yanera to come up and give you some information, and then I'll go over the standards that we have prepared that we're seeking a recommendation for council to adopt. Chief?
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really not a pleasure to talk about these things tonight because they are beginning to be a problem in our community. So actually, really, I'm going to talk about two things. One is vaping and the dangers associated with vaping. The other is some of the extracts, the THC, THC8, THC9. We'll talk about those in just a second. But the first part I'll talk about is the vaping. And so, as you can see here, from the picture, they're not marketing people like me. They're marketing our young people. We'll have some statistics here that show how many young people are using these vape products. The problem with these products is that they were marketed as a safe alternative to smoking, but they're totally unregulated. For example, there's 1,500 different variations of chemicals that they're putting into these vapes, and they're causing all kinds of issues. For example, when we talk about vaping, what it is, it's a chemical reaction. So there's a chemical that's added to these flavors, and it makes a chemical reaction, and it's causing damage to people's lungs, especially the young people. And so we're very concerned about that, especially in the proximity of elementary schools and high schools, and it's beginning to be a serious problem. And here's just some of the things that we know. We know that there was nearly 70 deaths, 2,800 illnesses actually that was 2020. And again, because they're not regulated, we don't know what they're putting into them. And so the Center for Disease Control says not to use anything that is THC. So what they're doing is, THC is the active ingredient in marijuana. It's also the active ingredient in hemp. There are two different ways to get that THC out of the plant. One is to take it from the hemp, one is to take it from the marijuana. The problem is we don't know where it comes from, whether it comes from marijuana, whether it comes from hemp, and it's placed in these vaping, and it's making children sick. The other thing they're doing with some of that THC is they're putting it into candies, and it might look like Skittles, it might look like gummy bears, and actually 2 of our elementary schools, we've had children that have gone to the emergency room because they've overdosed on THC. Didn't know what it was because it was in gummies and things that are normally marketed for children, and child brought it to school, gave it to some of his peers. They ate it, didn't know why they felt that way, and they were taken to the emergency room. So our goal has been to try to move these away from the elementary and the high schools. And so you can see here, these are students in 2018 and 2019. In high school, about 27% have used some type of vaping product. In the middle school, about 10%, 5 to 10%. And so our concern is trying to keep it out of the children's hands. And when a vape store with all these different colors and different flavors are across the street from these schools, they tend to have some issues. We did an operation, I believe we charged 8 stores for underage, because you have to be 21 in order to consume this, and they were selling to underage people. And so our goal is to try to keep it as far away from the elementary schools, the community centers, as we can. So this is recent too. 10% of middle school students and 28% of high school students use one of those products. When we talk about the Delta 8 THC, that is, hemp and marijuana are basically the same plant. The difference in the two is the THC content, which is 0.03. Now, our state lab will not test for that. So if we seize some of that oil and we have to have it tested, we have to get a private lab to test it in order to determine if it's above that 0.3. But what they're doing is they're putting it in higher concentrations so that people get a higher high, and what it's doing is it's making a lot of people sick. And so one of the things that we think is really important is, again, trying to keep it away from our children. And so I'll be glad to entertain any questions or, yes, sir.
Is there such a thing as secondhand vape smoke, like we're concerned with secondhand cigarette smoke?
It can be, yes, it can be, because again, those chemicals are used to create that vapor which people inhale, and they can be dangerous. The biggest thing is it's not regulated. So we don't have the FDC, we don't have anybody that is looking at what these chemicals are and how they're being mixed together. And then we're just talking about general vaping. When we talk about adding the THC content, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, they can be very dangerous. People can overdose on THC. And so, it can be dangerous. And that's why the legislature has made it age 21 in order to purchase these products. But we have 40-some vape stores in Jacksonville right now, and I think they're a tremendous problem. So this is just an attempt to keep it away from the children as much as we can.
Is there any sort of task force, ALE goes sort of more after alcohol? I'm sure they do tobacco as well. Is there anybody that is working on that now?
They do tobacco, okay? So they do regulate the tobacco, but most of these shops don't have a lot of tobacco. Most of them are concentrating on the THC and the vaping because it's more profitable. And so there are some that legitimately sell, but the bulk of them are selling the vape products, the vape chemicals, and the THC. I mean, if you go by, you can see it in the stores. They say Delta 8 sold here. Well, we know Delta 8 is supposed to be a THC content under 0.3, but that doesn't mean it is, because nobody's coming back and checking it. ALE doesn't come back and check it the way they go to ABC or to an ABC establishment and say, oh, well, it has to have the tax stamp, it has to be this is how much the alcohol content can be. There's nobody going back and checking that because they're totally unregulated.
But as far as consumption for minors, are they targeting that as well?
So we have targeted that. We have targeted that with undercover operations and gone on and did some underage purchases. But again, that's not as good as keeping it away from a middle schooler who's walking home that can walk in those stores and buy one of these items. And we are doing a prevention program, Catch My Breath. So we just finished the Commons Middle School, and we're in Northwoods Park, I think, right now. And we're doing Northwoods Park. We're doing all the middle schools and all the high schools, trying to get every student to go through that training to talk about the dangers of vaping, the dangers of using the Delta 8s and the Delta 9s and 10s. And so, because they are dangerous to kids.
Is there any local statistics as well? I saw there were some national ones, but is there any city or county-wide statistics on these impacts?
Well, we have some state statistics, and I'm assuming that we could drill down and look at it within the city. But I think it's a serious problem in both the middle schools and the high schools. Again, I mean, some of the flavors. I think I had the flavors up there as hot dog and, just Skittles and, things that normally middle school and high schoolers might recognize and think that it's a safe alternative. Again, it was marketed as a safe alternative, but they're totally unregulated.
What, if anything, are the owners saying? I mean, are they buying into, obviously attempting to keep it away from the teenagers?
Well, I mean, we've had some conversations with the owners and the importance of keeping it away from our young people. Obviously, if we went out and got eight people to buy from an underage person, then some of them are not paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Are
And
there
we'll
any
continue to do-
consequences to, like if somebody in a bar business sells to minors, eventually they could lose their license, their liquor license or their
Their
beer
ABC
license.
license.
Do we have a similar way to pull their business license? Shut them down if they're not cooperating?
Well, we have some nuisance abatement laws that we can use.
Yeah.
If they continue on and on, then we can look. The district attorney can pull those cases, the city attorney can file those cases. And in fact, in the last several years, we've worked with the city attorney to file a couple nuisance abatements on properties that cause a nuisance like that. But usually it takes multiple cases to do
Yes.
that. That's not a short-term fix. This, to some extent, will help us to try to regulate them, or at least new ones coming in, that, to prevent them from being in and around schools. And other, like the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, all those places where children gather, our parks and recreation facilities.
Do you think the FDA will ever take up the cause and start to regulate and legislate?
Well, I think the state is looking right now what they have to do in order to regulate this. But the Farmers Coalition was so strong, they were able to push this through, especially with the THC content, as far as hemp farming. So that's presented a problem with no regulations. So you're allowed to grow hemp now, and there is no real regulations that has somebody come into that store and say, just like ABC, and say, what are you doing? What are your things? We do ABC inspections. We have ABC powers, and we do ABC inspections all the time, especially to establishments that give us that we have significant challenges at.
So it won't be until it's legalized that the scrutiny comes in, because then it's tax revenue.
Well, but I also think it's a way that they've come under the radar. They've used something that hemp was supposed to be like the CBD oil. Was supposed to be stuff you rubbed on your hands and was supposed to make your arthritis go away, those kinds of things. Well, that really didn't
work.
No. So what's happening is they're taking the plants and they're extracting the THC and they're putting it in higher concentrations. Even though when they take it out of the plant, it's 0.3. I think I had a slide there of it. It's 0.3. What they can do is they can put a lot in those gummies. They can put a lot in those Skittles. And so folks are basically, our kids are overdosing on that THC content. I mean, that's why people smoke marijuana, is to use that THC content to get the high effect.
So some of those stores that are out there already that are close to schools, would they get like a grandfather type?
We'll get to that in a second.
Oh, okay.
Are you gonna tell us what we can do? to help?
I think first, I think this is one step. I mean, this is I mean, the prevention is extremely important. The enforcement is extremely important. This is another point. So, the other point is that I think there'll be plenty of time in this next election cycle to talk to our legislators about making sure that both the Delta 8 and Delta 9, whatever Delta 10 that comes in, is regulated. And same with the vapes, is making sure that it's regulated so it's safe for people to use. There's a little bit of difference between a young person, underage person using it and somebody that makes that conscious decision that's an adult. But our goal is to try to at least keep it out of the hands of the kids, because that's where we're seeing the most illnesses from. There's some studies out there right now that say that the effects on the lungs are permanent damage to young people's lungs with the vapes, especially those chemicals that are associated to create, when I first started looking at the vape, I thought it was like something that heated it up, and it does heat it to some extent, but what it is it's a chemical reaction. Like you put two chemicals together and it causes that vape. Well, there's a cost to that, and that cost is what's part of the problem. The other problem is the hot dog flavors and everything else could have anything in them, and because they're totally unregulated.
And they're also coming from other countries too, which they have no rules and regulations, so who knows what's in them.
We know a lot of it is coming from China. We know a lot of it's coming from Mexico, so.
My concern will be that, some of the chemicals, some of the heavy metals and some of the there are things that if they were in our drinking water, we'd pitch a fit.
Exactly.
And yet you're going in and buying something that's putting the same thing in you, and I'm going like, it doesn't make any sense, guys.
Marijuana is still illegal in this state. And so the hard part for us is, just like this slide here shows, if they take the extract from marijuana, it's illegal. If they take it from hemp, it's legal, as long as the concentration is below 0.3. The problem is how do we know where it came from?
You can't look at it and tell what concentration it is.
No, we have to get a lab, because the state lab can't do that kind of analysis. We have to get a private lab to do that, and it's rather expensive.
Is there one in or around Onslow County, a lab that will do that?
No, we send those, I think they're sending most of them to the Research Triangle, lab in the Research Triangle. Any other questions?
Well, thank you, Chief,
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you're doing.
and thanks for taking your night out. I know this wasn't your normal night to
Well,
work.
it's important for our children. It's definitely important for our children to make sure that we do everything we can to try to keep them away, just like we did with spice. I mean, we went through this
Yeah.
a number of years ago with the spice, which is synthetic marijuana, and that's another issue that we're dealing with on the Delta 8 and the Delta 9. Sometimes they're manufacturing it. They're manufacturing it instead of extracting it from the plant, and who knows what's in that. But I have confidence that our legislature will, during the short session, will address some of that, and maybe it'll help us regulate some of these places.
Well, thank you, Chief.
Appreciate it.
So as you'll see, this is a fairly long list, and this doesn't include all of them, but there's quite a few municipalities that have already drafted standards. And then there's several of us that are in the process and going through this now. And even some big places like the city of Burlington and Fayetteville are just now kind of wrestling with this issue. But based on the public health and safety concerns, the police department and planning, we kind of started looking at what our options are. And one of them would be, well, we could just prohibit it everywhere. And that's certainly an option. But we kind of looked at it and says, okay, well, if the goal is to try to get it away from the schools and the children, then just an outright prohibition may not be the best thing to do. So we wanted to kind of start with the pros and cons of what we're proposing. Obviously, the pros, as to echo with what the chief was talking about, is, with the brain developing till the age of 25, we want to try to reduce the opportunity for the young folks, the youth, to be able to get their hands on this. The flavors and marketing make the products more appealing to youth. Future establishment would be spaced away from schools, residential zones, parks, et cetera, thus safeguarding the health, safety, and welfare of those residents, particularly minors, and help with the proliferation. I mean, as Chief stated, there's over 40 of these that are in town already. Now, some cons, Ms. Harbrick, you mentioned it, this will create, if adopted, there will be nonconformities created. And anytime you create rules and regulations or change rules and regulations, that's just part of it a lot of times. So, and that's why we identified it, because that is a true issue, that they would become non-conforming. We are not proposing to prohibit them, as I stated just a second ago. So this isn't just we're just not going to allow anymore. And when the ones that we have go away, then we'll no longer have it. That's an option. The board could certainly make that as a motion. City council could certainly amend whatever is taken to them. But based on the direction we received last week, we don't feel that's the intent of city council. While it's certainly a tool in the toolbox, we didn't get the impression that's where they wanted to go with it. So we basically revised the codes accordingly. And it will impact the cost. And the cost could be an applicant that needs to get a floor plan, survey, to go through the special use permit process. It could be an impact to a building owner that wants to rent it to a tenant. So there's impacts here, but we think that the benefits far outweigh the cost. So based on the information that we had researched, appreciate Mr. Smith's, he did a lot of work on getting a lot of the research from a lot of these other towns and communities. And based on that, we pulled together and figured out, what was our best foot forward, and met with the staff at Jacksonville Police Department, and we feel that we've come up with a solution. And this kind of highlights it, but basically we're going to amend a definition to, kind of wrap all of the hookah lounge, vape shops, tobacco, those type of establishments together in one definition. Create a special use permit requirement in the CC and the industrial zones. And some of the other stuff, like the parking's just simply changing from hookah lounge to a hookah lounge, vape shop, tobacco, so that it lines up with one another. Same thing with 9.3. We are bringing convenience stores into the mix on the third bullet, just because that's what a lot of these people identify themselves as. We had to do that. And then create specific standards. So on the screen, you'll see 500 feet from residential zoning districts, 1,500 feet from things such as schools, daycares, youth facilities, community centers, city recreational facility, parks, or hospitals. 2,000 feet from another similar establishment. And then I put on there just to kind of help clarify it, although it didn't have to be here. It would already be covered in Article 7. In accordance has got one too many E's. That when a business closes down, that's non-conforming, they can reopen if it's within 180 days. So for that reason, if a business shuts down and a new person tries to go in next door, we won't be able to do anything with that permit until the 180 days is up. So, we just kind of added that just for, helping clarify that, the intent and everything else there. All federal, state, and local laws, rules, and regulations must be adhered to the operation of such establishments. I think Chief touched on that with the fact that we've been able to have folks under the age of 21 go in and buy. So just kind of, or it's already law, but this is just to kind of help remind the entrepreneurs of these businesses that they need to be following these rules. Once again, I've kind of talked about Article 7. It will become non-conforming. And then the site plan with the special use permit that's required will have to identify certain pieces of information within 2,500 feet of the proposed establishment. And the last thing is that all street-level windows shall be visually permeable between 3 and 8 feet. Ironically enough, we already have that standard in the UDO. This is just basically, once again, kind of re-emphasizing it for this type of land use. The idea behind it is keep your windows open, you can't cover them up because there may be illegal activities going on behind the scenes. Plus, the idea with glazing is to have, to be able to see into the storefront. So those are the use-specific standards that we have proposed. We understand that there are some financial impacts for both the applicants, the landowners, as well as city staff. I mean, the additional staff time for GIS purposes, permit review, plan review, bringing these forth to planning board and city council, that's going to be more tasking on city staff. So there's a financial impact here across the board. I usually don't have many financial impact statements, but we felt it was important to kind of bring that to the board's attention. And based on that, we believe that this amendment is consistent with the CAMA Plan Policy 38.2, which is to revise our development regulations to be responsive to innovative development proposals and existing conditions. The amendment is reasonable and is in the public interest. So staff would recommend, the Planning Advisory Board recommend the council approve the UDO found in attachment A. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you haven't already asked that I can answer, and if something's come up, Chief is still here if you have to ask him anything further, but be happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
Mr. King, I know that you mentioned existing establishments of non-conforming will be allowed to continue in accordance with Article 7. We were talking about places being grandfathered in, but these places are not, it's not like a car wash where you're putting stuff in the ground and making a substantial investment into the site, and another place can't come in months later and turn it into something else. So I was wondering what the possibility of putting a time limit for these non-conforming places to be either conformed or shut down. Was there any discussion toward that?
We could certainly amateurize and tell everybody that's in business that they need to go through the process and become compliant or shut down. The last time we did that was the late 90s with the painted on signs and the detention retention ponds. That was very minimally discussed. I mean, we certainly could investigate that, if the board so desires to have us kind of look into that and adopt this, recommend approval of this to council, and then ask that we kind of go look into that. We certainly could bring back some sort of an amortization schedule.
I mean, right now, we don't even know how many would be
Yeah.
non-conforming.
I mean, they just move into an empty slot, put in some shelves, and, I mean, it's not like they're actually doing, like, a restaurant has to build a kitchen. These guys don't do anything.
Well, you've got some large convenience stores out there that also, although not to this extent, but sell the electronic cigarettes and such. Are they grouped in?
So if you look at the definition, primarily engaged in the sale. So if it's an accessory.
Well, they sell gasoline, diesel,
So that's not-
burritos, hot
this
dogs.
type of establishment.
Okay.
That would be a convenience store with gas sales,
Same
and they're
thing
not
with
primarily,
drugstores.
I'm sorry?
Same thing with drugstores.
Well, that would be a pharmacy use.
Okay.
Because we did have a conversation about, if there's some sort of an FDA-approved hemp pharmacy, if they were to legalize other things,
Okay, yeah.
then we're gonna be before you, probably side by side
Okay,
with the
okay.
chief to be saying, hey, we need to make some changes, and hopefully we'll be able to be ahead of that. Whereas I think with this particular one, I hate to say it, but I think we're a little bit behind it. Sometimes you're in front of it, sometimes you're behind. On this one, we're behind it.
Okay.
And we feel like this is the best step forward with where we are right now. That way, it kind of keeps or further restricts, I won't say keep, but further restricts future ones from coming in. We certainly can go back and look. Do we want to amateurize?
Yeah. Now, the ones that are already here, are they owned by a handful of owners? Okay.
So, you have the landowner, and then
No,
you have the
which is
business
totally
owner.
separate.
business.
No, I'm talking the business.
Business owner. I'm not sure who,
Okay.
It boils down to when people apply to go into any type of business, they put a contact person and a business owner. I don't know whether it's the same person or whether it's different people.
You will probably find out when it's time for a public hearing.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But on an admin side, page 16, you've got your paragraph 3 up above that talks about 2,000 feet. And then in paragraph 6, you're talking 2,500.
That's correct. It was intentional.
Intentional? Okay.
Ryan, I have another question. When we were talking about like primary use and I guess secondary use, or I don't know what the right terminology for that would be, who determines, what is like the primary use of, like, let's just use Circle K, for example. When they submit their application, are they the ones that say their primary use is gasoline sales? Or who establishes that?
That would be an interpretation. That would be a city staff interpretation. So, you know, when you look at Circle K and they've got 12 fuel pumps and there's people that are sitting there getting gas all the time, and people are going in there and they're coming out with drinks and, you know, convenience items, and there's not a whole lot, the display's not very big. It's pretty clear that their primary business is not tobacco or vape materials. But that's where, with a lot of things with zoning, you know, you can begin to kind of slice and dice with that. We actually looked at doing percentages and square footages, and based on some of the feedback that we got on the listserv was, well, now you're starting to kind of venture over into the Department of Commerce's realm, and, you know, everything in the UDO would be primarily, and then all of a sudden you'd have this kind of outlier, 500 square feet or 2% or whatever it is. And, you know, but I also know that we've got applications that say that they sell coffee and there's not a coffee machine in the joint.
Right.
So, I mean, gas sales and there's not a lot being sold. But most of them aren't, most of the vape stops that we have here don't have gas dispensers along with it. There may be 2 or 3, but most of them, that's not the business that they're in.
Brian, are we familiar with what the county's doing on this?
Interesting. No, I meant to reach out to Carter Metcalf at the county and ask him. Interestingly enough, the county attorney asked for.
I think the chief may have something to input here.
The Brett DeSelms, the county attorney, reached out to the city attorney, and we shared what we were proposing just this past week with them. So I'm not sure, but chief?
Yeah, and I think they're looking at the same kind of ordinance, so that we would do it countywide. So I think Monday night, at the next commission meeting, they're going to bring this up as well. And we've shared what we're doing with the county attorney as well.
So a lot of what we brought forward is from looking at all those other towns and cities, what they had drafted. And then also, we looked at our ABO, our adult business standards. And, you know, we may be more strict than some and less strict than others. It was just through collaboration with the police and the city attorney and planning staff that we came up with what we felt was the best solution for Jacksonville. Zoning laws are different every single municipality you go to. They're none necessarily the same unless you copy and paste verbatim.
I want to clarify, so we're not allowing the use, we're just creating it as a special use.
With spacing standards from the residential zones and those public places, you know, for focused on the minors.
Gotcha.
So we are not proposing a prohibition of this land use. We certainly could. It wouldn't be the only use that we have prohibited in the UDO, but that is not what we are proposing based on looking at the other towns, conversations internally, and then also the direction that we received from City Council last week. Certainly an option, and they could change their mind between now and then and say, hey, we want to get rid of all of them in terms of no more new ones. And then if they want to say, well, go shut all of them down, I mean, we'd have to figure out, well, can we do that legally and what would be the process? And what comes to my mind would be an amortization. So if that's the direction that we get sent down, then we'd have to investigate that. But I'm not saying that's what we're doing. We're trying to basically keep any more from happening too close to residential zones, the schools, you know, where children congregate, et cetera.
And this would give us a chance to at least figure out which ones were non-conforming. If we did this, we'd know which ones are non-conforming because we'd have a from this point on, all we have to do is look at the older ones to figure out which ones are within the wrong distance.
So we'd probably have to kind of break that down a little bit. So
Yeah.
first of all, what's the spacing from residential? How many of the existing 40-some are conforming or non-conforming?
Yep.
Let's say that they're all non-conforming. Well, we don't have to go any further, but let's say some meet the spacing away from residential. So then we'd have to look at it and say, okay, well, how many of those are within 2,000 feet of one another? And kind of begin to peel that down, and then, okay, which one was there first, maybe? I don't know, we'd have to really dive into how that's gonna go down.
But when a business is non-conforming, doesn't that affect their ability to get expansion or loans or anything to their site?
It certainly could.
Okay.
So we would look at it as that they're non-conforming. So Article 7 is gonna begin to apply. So if they wanna do a renovation project, what's the value of the building? How much are they looking to do to the building? If it's not more than that 25% threshold, they can't expand a nonconformity. We'd have to look at whatever Article 7 states. I don't want to misspeak on what Article 7 is, but, go ahead.
I was gonna add to that. So if this is adopted by council next week, that's when we intend to take it, they all automatically become non-conforming, all of them.
Yes.
They're all, so they cannot expand, they cannot do major renovations that would trigger enlargement or intensification. So that's automatically, we've got control, or the city has more regulation on them now if this is adopted, because they will all immediately become non-conforming, because they don't have a special use permit.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So they're all going to become grandfathered. But then let's say that several close down. So now am I still non-conforming? So is it based on residential? Is it based on spacing? You know, so we'd have to kind of unpeel that onion, if you will. But Jeremy's spot on. They will all become non-conforming as soon as council adopts this, if they so choose to do so.
You did a good job explaining. Thank you, Chief.
So at that point, what would we determine, so if everything's non-conforming, we're sort of blindly voting that this is gonna be, I guess, making everyone non-conforming?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's blindly. I think as Jeremy just stated, it's going to make every single one of them non-conform because none of them have a special use permit.
But I guess I'm saying at that point, whenever they close or reopen, then I think you're hitting a dangerous field there where you're just saying, they're all non-conforming, now we're creating a problem, maybe 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road. Obviously, it's something that people are purchasing these products there. I mean, capitalism obviously is dictated to open 40-something stores in Jacksonville. People do want it to a certain extent.
I mean, valid
Yeah.
points. However, whenever we adopt rules and regulations in the UDO, there's unintended consequences, and sometimes they're intended consequences. And whether it's unintended or intended, the fact is they're all going to become non-conforming if council adopts this. So then, if one closes down, if another one wants to reopen in that space within 180 days, we'll give them a permit tomorrow. They just have to apply for it within 180 days. Now, the one caveat to that is, if I open up a flower shop within that 180 days, that grandfather use has been changed. At that point, it doesn't matter if that's been closed 2 days. The flower shop was open for 2 weeks, and then I wanted to reopen it as a vape shop, you can't do it. Once you change to a conforming use, the 180-day rule goes away. So, I mean, it's going to boil down to the 41. If somebody shuts down, then we'll just have to deal with whatever Article 7 tells us that we have to do. And we'll, no different than anything else, we'll just have to deal with that. And then if somebody wants to become conforming, they'd have to go through the process. That's where it gets a little bit more tricky because, special use permit, go through the process. What about it makes it non-conforming? The residential zone, spacing from another, who was there first? That's where it'll get a little bit more, interpretation. Okay, well, who goes first, who goes second, who goes third? And I would look at, well, who established and got the CO first? But we'd have to evaluate that.
But if this goes through and you're non-conforming, but you know that you would be conforming when you did the special use permit, you'd be wise to go ahead and get the special use permit and become conforming if you know you've met all the requirements.
Correct.
Then you wouldn't have to worry.
That's correct. And that's the case with any nonconformity.
And then on section 1 of 9D, it says, shall not be located, that's on page 15. Within located 500 feet, measured property line to property line from the downtown residential district and/or any residential zoning districts. Does that allow any space in the downtown district to be granted special use for this?
Downtown business is not the CC or the industrial zone. As we have it drafted, the only two zones that could go. But we're not going to space it from a business zone. We're spacing it from the residential and the downtown residential. The reason why we specifically mentioned downtown residential is if you look at our use categories, the downtown residential is in a mixed use category, not in the blanket residential zone. That's why we called that out specifically. So if it's within, it just can't go in the downtown zone. But the spacing, the 500-foot spacing is only from downtown residential. It's not a 500 spacing from DTB. If we spaced it from DTB as well, then it would shrink the area.
I'm saying, I guess, is there any places that that a establishment could be permitted from the downtown residential district, I guess? Or, like, is there a downtown residential district within 500 feet of, like, let's say Newbridge Street here? So then that,
There probably is. I'd have to pull up a map, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you have downtown residential in the area, so 500 feet, we'd have to pull a buffer to see what that looks like.
so odds are it probably weeds out any downtown business district for having one of these.
But you couldn't have one anyhow because that's not, we're only proposing the CC and the industrial. So
Okay.
in order to allow in the downtown business, we'd have to add that as a third zoning district to allow these establishments. So if it was, if downtown business was added along with CC and industrial, then it would open up that zone. They just would then have to meet the spacing from the residential zones, the downtown residential zones, and also from other establishments. But we didn't propose it in the downtown zone. I mean, it certainly could, it could be added.
Yeah, like, I'm just saying, like, if a cigar shop wanted to be downtown at this, if this goes into effect, it's gonna prevent them from being able to do that.
That's correct.
What's your wishes? What's your wishes, people?
Calm down.
Sadly, that wouldn't be a, no. Any other discussion? Please remember that this is just a recommendation before city council. City council will have the final, all you're deciding is whether you recommend as planning board, whether we recommend approval or not.
Mr. Hummer, could we make an amendment to number 1? Is that possible to do, to strike through that? On 9D, I guess,
What page?
15.
I guess the time to change it would be before we make our motion. 9D,
Yes, number 1.
and so you're gonna,
Like if a tobacco shop or cigar shop wanted to open in the downtown business district, I'm recommending that they should be able to, as long as it meets the other, I guess, criterias.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
If that's your intent, I would suggest that you look at page 12, near the bottom. And you would want to unstrike the special use permit in downtown business and leave that as a special use. And then one of these establishments could open up in downtown as long as they met the other. So I think, same thing, just kind of a different approach.
Yeah.
Leave the one, because I think you're wanting to allow it in the downtown zone,
Right.
and that would be accomplished if you undo the strike through at the bottom of page 12, and then you would leave one, which is basically the 500-foot separation from any residential zoning district plus the downtown residential district.
Okay, you got that?
Uh,
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to motion for
amend?
that, to amend that,
Oh, we don't, help me out.
I guess if that's possible. I mean, I don't,
Yeah,
Certainly can make a motion to approve with that change.
yeah, why don't you do that? Motion approved with the change. And then we'll look for a second. Is that okay, Chase?
well, I would probably not be in favor of this altogether. So then I wouldn't want a motion to approve that.
Okay,
Okay, so we'll just leave that as is then.
okay. Fair enough. Very good. Okay, anything else, folks? Ryan, what happens if nobody wants to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. We'll move
Okay.
ahead on this and go ahead and approve this
Okay.
as presented to us tonight.
Okay, so you're saying that it's reasonable in the public interest? Staff recommends approval of the UDO amendment.
Text amendment, attachment A.
Okay, so we have a motion,
I'll second it.
and we have a second. Motion, second. Got it?
Second, so I wasn't sure.
That's a good, we were gonna do that split second now.
That's okay.
Steve was right in there with me.
Could be Bob, Steve, whatever. Okay, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. You got that, Ryan? We did discuss it. Healthy discussion. I like that. Good job. Very good job. I appreciate everybody's opinion, and I appreciate everybody looking at it carefully, because that's what council wanted us to do. And council could sit back and say 3-2, 3-3, there's no telling what it is. But they'll have a public hearing, and that may affect what they do. But we've done our due diligence, okay? So what's next?
All right, so similar to what we've done over the last couple of months, into last year where we, had our marathon 2-hour session the one night. I'm not gonna do 2 hours tonight, hopefully, but just kind of some discussion. And the example that we want to go over tonight is just signage allotment. And this is just one random site that I chose to just kind of highlight, just to kind of share the way that our signage allotment is determined for one particular business. And this happens to be the Circle K, which is a corner lot at Western and Gum Branch. That's the example that I used. That basically a building, the building's 113 linear feet, so they get 226 square feet on the front. They get 113 on the left, 113 on the right, 113 on the back, and 5 square feet at the primary entrances. So that's a total of 570 square feet that the Circle K gas station ties into kind of what we were just talking about a little bit, how much building signage they get. So with that, this is an example of kind of what they did. And I point this out because this is actually something that Jeremy has worked with a lot of the applicants on to try to give them the utmost flexibility. If you look at the little red squares right here, across the frontage, and here, those are all basically, they call them snap frames. So they get these window units, or not window units, but these snap frames permitted along with this sign here. So you'll see right here what their max is allowed. The Circle K sign 63 square feet, and then these wall snap frames across here, that's part of their sign allotment. That allows them to go out there and change those every day, every night, every week, every month, once a year, whatever they want to do. And that way they don't have to keep coming and getting a permit from us. Bojangles recently did the same thing right across the street where they said, hey, look, we want to identify these things where we can change with our monthly specials or whatever it may be. We want to be able to go ahead and get that permitted. So one time and I'm done. And that saves them money, time, saves us time. And as long as our ordinance doesn't change, they're good to go. Which I would argue, even if our ordinance changes, they've got a permit to do that. So that actually protects them so that even if they become non-conforming, they still have a permit and they're allowed to kind of make those changes because they have the frame in place. It's just a reface. So this is the front. So they're allowed 226. They used 174. Here's the side, same thing. They decided to go ahead and add the snap frames. 113 square feet allowed on each side, and you can see they only used 40 square feet at the most on the right side elevation. And then across the rear as well. Once again, they only used about half of the standard. So they have a canopy. Not everybody has a canopy. So they get 15% of the canopy to add as well. So they've chosen to use, here's what they're allowed. 122 on the front, 122 on the rear, and 10 on the sides. So they get an additional 264 square feet for the canopy. And here's another example of the canopy. Basically, you can see that they're proposing to put something on the left side and on the front right corner. And this is the signs that they're putting there respectively. And based on that, I'll show you what their amount is here in just a moment. But basically, that's what they're allowed, 15 square feet. They didn't use that. And here, using the same site plan, since they're a corner lot, they get 2 freestanding signs. So this is their freestanding sign. It's 147 square feet here at the bottom. They have a sign here, and they have a sign underneath the north area compass there. So they're allowed 2 because they're a corner lot, and their spacing is more than 100 feet. This sign's oriented to Western, and this sign's oriented to Gum Ranch, so they're allowed 2 signs. So, as I just mentioned, they have allowable sign heights 35, allowable freestanding sign based on the street frontage is 150. The signs they permitted were 147. The maximum amount of the 150 for a message center is 50%. So what does that mean? They get 1,134 square feet of signage on that site. I think that's pretty generous. If you look at what they actually used, they didn't use but a little more than, right there, a little bit more than 50%. They used 662 square feet of their 1,134 square foot of signage. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there to kind of give an example. This is the kind of stuff that we look at when sign permits come in, how we evaluate the ordinance, and, kind of some ways that they can utilize their signage. That's all that we had before the board's consideration tonight. Be happy to answer any questions that you all may have as it relates to this. And if not, I appreciate your being here tonight and helping us with agenda item number 1.
Any other questions? Ryan, this is time for report. What reports you got for us?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good.
Kind of going back to the signage allotment. There's such issues around town. Who's enforcing this? How is it being enforced? I know we've had some discussions, you and I just on the phone, but it seems like some of them just getting out of hand. There's regulations, all that. Maybe I'm opening a whole can of worms tonight. Don't need to get into a lengthy discussion. We bring them another time. I don't care. But it's just, you go around town and see, it's like, who in the world? If we're not going to enforce the rules, then we just got all kinds of problems. And it's just seeing going on and on, constantly, different places. And we push the limits, and then, you all are trying to do your job. What do we do?
So that's actually an interesting question. At the last meeting, Mayor Phillips appointed 2 council members to kind of serve as a little subcommittee. So I think that we're getting ready to have some discussions as it relates to that issue. So, but the Neighborhood Improvement Services Department has the zoning and code enforcement officers, and they're the ones that are tasked with the enforcement in the field of the Unified Development Ordinance and the City Code. So the sign regulations are on the Unified Development Ordinance. That department's responsible for doing those inspections. And based on staffing levels, based on, Do they get proactive or do they react to complaints? And that's, I think, part of some of the dialogue that will be had moving forward.
They also have the law and height and all types of other things.
Grass
Same
weeds, junk
inspectors.
vehicles, nuisances,
Yeah,
Okay.
but great point.
but if you keep their number on speed dial, you can report anything and they will take care of it.
Well, you see certain businesses just tend to, you know, they're pushing the limits and who's calling them on the carpet, you know? So I won't point out any particular ones, but I see it. We go from a sign to all of a sudden you got animation and you got all of a sudden you got something, you know, showing something and it diverts your attention away. And I think that's why we got these discussions a long time ago, like when you can only have, you know, the sign can only change at a certain rate.
Used to
So
be
you-
30 seconds. Now
Yeah.
it's 8 seconds.
Yeah, and next thing you know, you've got all kinds of things going on in these signs, and it's very distracting, and takes you away from the focus of traffic safety anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, great points, and I think that's kind of why we're bringing forward stuff. It's just sign seems to be the hot button item since we said, hey, we're gonna bring stuff for you, you know, bring stuff forward last year, is that we're just kind of sprinkling some information.
All right.
Because some people may not understand what the ordinance allows, what it may not allow, and we're just trying to basically give little snippets. We've sent out to the mayor and council in their management reports a few months ago, just little information tidbits. Because,
All right.
you know, nobody necessarily knows the UDO as good as planning staff and the zoning enforcement staff. And sometimes there may be some misconceptions and maybe there's some real problems.
Well, I
And-
mean, I think y'all are doing a great job. You know, I've been on this board a long time, and there's others and some, and it's like, we put all this work in, you guys put a lot of work into this stuff, and then it's like, these business out here, it's like, who cares? You know, the rules are rules, you know? Let's all comply with the rules, and it just have a much better town.
Well, I'll just use this slide for example. If somebody came in and said, hey, I want to make a change to the ordinance for more wall signage. Well, here's an example. Doesn't mean that there's not 1,000 other examples. Here's just one. It was purely random.
Right.
Fairly new site, had the graphics. I don't know why I picked this site, have no clue. It was no hidden motive, but they didn't even use the 570 square feet that they're allowed. They got 320 permitted.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Jeremy often hears from the national sign companies, I hear that our wall signage allotment is generous. But yet I also know there's also a lot of violations that are out there. You know, we permit them
Yeah.
at 100% of what they're allowed to have, and then they add another 500% after the fact.
Right.
So,
I think y'all are doing a great job. It's just, keep doing what you're doing. I know it's gotta be frustrating, but you're doing a good job.
good.
Anything else? Thank you.
You're welcome.
For what it's worth, I agree with you. Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, do we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? And a second. Meeting adjourned.